Welcome everyone to VFI Educates. We have one of our favorite speakers who's been here, I don't even know how many times, three, four times, Akiva Gersh. So we want to welcome him back. In other news, we have a bunch of trips coming up. So if you are interested in going to Israel and having sort of an all-inclusive tour with volunteering in one form or another, whether it's in a rehab unit, whether you're like working with Leaf Note to rebuild the communities that were destroyed. Whatever you want to do, kind of take a look at our website and see if any of the trips look good to you, and then contact the person at the bottom of the page because that is the point person for that trip. All right, so I will introduce Akiva. Akiva has worked in the field of Jewish and Israel education for 20 years. In addition to guiding students around Israel, Akiva leads tours to Poland to teach about the Holocaust. He is the editor of the book Becoming Israeli, a compilation of blogs and essays that speak of the inspiring and the sometimes wacky and crazy experience of making Aliyah. Akiva himself made Aliyah in 2004, and he's here to speak to us about the Haggadah.
Great.
All you.
All right. Thanks so much. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite again. Just about a little over a week before the big holiday of Passover or Pesach. It's an exciting time. It's a busy time. And, there's something unique about every single Jewish holiday. And there's definitely unique things about the holiday of Pesach. My kids sometimes ask me, like, what's your favorite Jewish holiday? So I always tell them, the next one coming up, right? Because there's something powerful and unique and just like, something that we only do on this holiday. And that's very, very true when it comes to Pesach. And we'll share some thoughts about what is unique about Pesach as compared to other Jewish holidays. But basically what I like to do with the time that we have together is to highlight a few of the parts of the Seder, right, and go a little bit deeper into them and share some insights, some teachings, some thoughts. Right, of course, we won't have time for everything, or we would be here for the whole Seder, right, for hours and hours. But we'll leave that for next Saturday night when we'll all be sitting, hopefully, God willing, around Seder tables, friends, families, community members, engage in this incredible, incredible ritual. And I'd like to start with that just to really recognize that there's really nothing like the Pesach Seder in all of Jewish tradition. And all the things that we do. We do lots of things in Judaism. We have lots of actions, lots of holidays, lots of really beautiful aspects throughout the year. Looking at the Seder, it's a very, very unique thing that we do, right? And when you look at Passover, right? Of course, we know, 7 days if you're in Israel, 8 days if you're outside of Israel, of not eating chametz, of eating matzah, and all the reasons behind that. But what's unique, one of the things that's unique about Pesach is that it starts with this very unique, kind of concentrated, powerful thing on the very first night, right? We don't see that with other holidays. We don't see that with Sukkot, right? Sukkot, pretty much every single day of Sukkot is the same idea. Sitting in the sukkah, waving the lulav and the etrog, right? Shavuot is one day, 2 days outside of Israel, right? Hanukkah, it's 8 days. We light the candles every night. Okay, so a different number, but it's still like the same action. Pesach is almost like two different holidays, kind of, glued together. We have like the first day, which is like, the Seder night, which is this big event that people like prepare for, both in terms of like cooking food and, getting all their thoughts and teachings ready that they want to share at the Seder. And then it's like the rest of the week. It's kind of like the rest of the week is like, just don't eat chametz, you don't actually even have to eat matzah as an obligation the rest of the time of Passover. The only real obligation to eat matzah is at the Seder itself. So it's really kind of like, this one day, this first night, not even a full day, like the night, and then like the rest of the holiday. And again, we don't see such a thing in any other Jewish holiday. And again, it's something that, people really prepare for. Now, of course, people cook and get ready for other holidays, but nothing like Pesach. Nothing like Pesach, nothing like Passover, right? There was actually an idea in Jewish law that you should start preparing for a Jewish holiday in terms of learning its laws and customs 30 days before the holiday. That actually comes from Passover because there's so much to learn about it. There's so many laws and intricacies and details, right? Like getting your homes, your kitchens ready for Passover. the cleaning again, of course, the cooking, either, you buy new utensils or you're koshering the old ones that were used all year round so that you can use them for Passover. It's something unparalleled. Right? There's a real unique thing happening here. That's just unparalleled with any other holiday. And it really reflects the uniqueness and the unique power, I'll even say, and the unique beauty of Pesach, right? So if we focus on the Seder itself, okay, you've done all the preparations, you've done all the cleaning, you got rid of your chametz, you did all the things that you needed to do, right? You're finally at the Seder. Okay, what's the Seder all about? It's another very unique and interesting thing that we have a few, or at least a couple, unique mitzvot, unique commandments that we engage in and we fulfill at the Seder itself. The first one, we literally have a mitzvah to tell the story. No other time of the Jewish year do we have a mitzvah on the level of obligation, right? Sometimes we use the word mitzvah to refer to like a good deed. Oh, that was such a mitzvah you did. Okay, good, really, it makes sense. But other times, and I would even say most of the time, when the word mitzvah is used, it's like an obligation. We literally have an obligation to tell a story at the Seder. Of course, that story is the story of the Exodus from Egypt, right? But it's like no other time of the year do we fill a mitzvah through telling a story, right? And what does that show us? It shows us the deep importance of telling the story to the next generation, telling our story. Our people's story. We say it every single year. We've been saying it every single year for over 3,000 years. It's that important. I don't care how many times you've heard it. I don't care how many times you've read it. I don't care how many times you've told it. Every single year comes to Seder night, we have that mitzvah all over again to tell the story. And we're telling that story primarily to the next generation, but we're also telling that story to ourselves. It even says in Jewish law, if for some reason you're by yourself for the Seder night, right? You have to tell yourself the story. You still have the mitzvah to tell the story. Why? Because that's the importance of telling our people's story. We know that Jewish people are masters. First of all, we're really good storytellers, okay? But we're masters of memory. We are masters of remembering. It's like built into who we are as a people. I would even say that's one of the reasons, we're still here. That we keep telling our story, whether it's written down, recorded in written form, or we're telling it orally. Right? We don't forget. We hold on, and we understand the importance of telling our story to the next generation. Right? Whether that's like our people's story or the national story, or our own individual stories. It's so important to pass those stories on to the next generation so they know so they know what? They know where they come from. I mean, we've talked about in other classes, that we've had before, that have had the merit to be with you to speak about the unique challenges of this generation. When it comes to Judaism, when it comes to Israel, right? It's not easy. It's not simple. And because of that, it's even more important. In the past, it was like understood, of course, I'm going to tell my kids the story. They're going to grow up with that story. They're going to tell their kids the story. It was like a given for generations and generations and generations. Now we know. We know the statistics. We've seen the studies, the surveys. It's not a given anymore. It's not a given anymore, right? That they're going to receive that story and pass on that story, right? And which makes it even more important to keep telling that story and to tell it. Okay, and this is also a very, very powerful part of the Seder, to tell it in a way that they can hear it. It's not just telling it, however I want to tell it, or the way I was told it, or the way I think is the best way to tell it. I have to understand what's the best way for them to understand. Understand who they are, what it means to be a Jew, how beautiful it is to be part of the Jewish people, how important it is to keep the Jewish people and our story alive and to keep passing it on. To keep it alive, right? To be part of it, not just pass it on, but be part of it, right? Connect to it, impact it, and then pass it on. And again, I think of all the generations of our very long history, we might literally be in the generation where this is like emergency time. The lights are flashing. We got to tell these kids the story of where they come from. It's not a given anymore. It's not a given anymore that they're going to care and that they're going to pass on the story to the next generation, right? And that's why it's so important. We see this built into the Pesach Seder, is understanding the best way to tell that story, and again, in a way that they can receive it. Where do we see that? How do we see that? We see it in that we're just not reading a text. The Pesach Seder is not like a play. If you saw a certain play that you love 5 times, it's going to be the same play every single time. They read the script, they memorize their lines, they say the same thing every single time, right? That's not the Pesach Seder. Even though we have the text in the Haggadah, right, already there for us, it's almost like a framework. Here, of course, we say the words, but on some level, there's like, okay, this is like the framework. Now bring in yourself, bring in your creativity. Who is at your table? How do they need to be told? How do they need to hear it? And that's why we have so many props in the Pesach Seder. Think about it. Right? We have so many props. We have the mats, we have the maror, we have the Seder plate, we have the glasses, we have, people, and then people add their own creativity. If you look at different kinds of Jews and different kind of Jewish communities from all over the world, they've developed their own unique ways of doing things. Like the Moroccans will like take a bag and walk around the Seder table and pretend that they're leaving Egypt. Different communities will wave the matzah like over the heads of people. The Yemenites, what they do, we Ashkenazi Jews, we have like our little, karpas, our little thing that we take to eat, like, and then we're like hungry the rest of the Seder until the dinner time. They have an entire table filled with greens that they just munch on the entire Seder. It's covered. That's how they set their table. Like covered with all these greens that they're going to eat as karpas and then throughout the Seder until they get to the meal. That's the uniqueness. That's the creativity. Okay, and that's like on like kind of like the community level. But how can I be creative for the people who are sitting at my table, so that I can tell them the story, right, in a way that they're going to be inspired, that they're going to hear it, they're going to connect to it. You're like, this is my story, this is my people, right? There's a famous musician from back in the day who said, "In this great future, we can't forget our past." He wasn't a Jew, but it's such a Jewish quote. In this great future, we can't forget our past. We're living in unbelievable times. I mean, unbelievable. Like all the technology, the phones, and now it's like the AI, and it's like ChatGPT. It's like, what next? It's unbelievable. Electric cars. It feels like every week there's something new coming out into the world. We're living in that great future, but we can't forget our past. Seder night is all about reminding the youth and ourselves but primarily the youth. The mitzvah, as it's worded in the Torah, in Jewish tradition, is to tell the youth, to tell the next generation, to tell the younger generation, right? And again, we do it in we're encouraged to. The framework is absolutely there to do it in such a way, in a creative way, in a fun way, in a hands-on way, right? To really get their interest piqued. We know that we start the Seder with Manishtana, right? The 4 questions. Manishtana, Laila, Hazeh, right? The 4 kashas, right? Or you say in Yiddish, right? The 4 kashas, okay? We start the whole Seder with questions. Why? On one level, those questions will be answered. Why is this night different than every other night? But it's also to open the space for questions, right? When you look in the details of the reasons the Seder is the way it is, it's based on the telling of the story. Like we said, we have a mitzvah to tell the story, but specifically through questions and answers. We're not just reading a script. We're not just reading a text. We're not like on a stage performing for everybody. We're getting people engaged, involved. We want it to be interactive. And again, we start with the Manishtana. We start with these questions to show everyone present, especially the youth. I keep saying this, right? That please ask me your questions. What are your questions? I want to hear your questions. Ask your questions. We encourage questions. We're not afraid of questions. We invite you to ask questions so we can discuss and we can, explore together. That gets people involved. The Seder, the Pesach Seder, is meant to be at its core an interactive experience, right? Which in and of itself that's Jewish education. That's how Jewish education was meant to be. Jewish education is about asking questions. Now, look, most of us grew up, in a very kind of Western educational framework. What do I mean by that? You sit at your desk, the teacher's at the front, the teacher talks, the teacher knows everything. You take your notes, you study your notes for the test, you get a 98, and if not, I don't know, right? That's not the Jewish way of education. The classic Jewish way of education is sitting around the table, right, with the teacher, discussing, involved, asking questions, right? Challenging the teacher even. You're allowed to, right? If you look in the classic mode of Jewish education, specifically in the yeshiva model, right, where the typical traditional way of learning Torah, you go into like the place where they're studying Torah. It sounds like I don't know what. There's like noise. There's like people are talking over each other. They're like sometimes even like so passionate about the Talmudic argument that they're screaming. They're standing up. It's like the opposite of a library, right? It's very engaged. It's very active. It's very energetic. There's this beautiful picture I've seen many times of going back to Yemen, right? That in Yemen, the Yemenite Jewish community, about 60,000 or so Yemenite Jews moved to Israel after the state of Israel was created, right? It was a beautiful ancient community in Yemen. Most of them were very poor. They didn't have much money. And so typically a teacher would only have one copy of a book, not enough to give every student, right? So the teacher would sit with the book facing him, and all the kids would sit around in a circle. Okay. And when some of these kids made Aliyah, when they moved to Israel and they got to like, an Israeli classroom, when they were handed a book, their own book for the first time, many of these kids turned it upside down or like like an angle. And the teacher was like, what are you doing? And tried to straighten it out. And they would, change it again. And then they realized this is the way they learned to read in Yemen because they sat at a certain angle to the book to the teacher, and they never actually had the merit of seeing it like straight up the way it's supposed to be. Unbelievable, right? But what does that show us? It shows us group learning, communal learning together. And not just like, everyone in their own book and just like listen to the teacher and write your notes in your own little notebook, right? The Jewish way of learning, of studying, is with this kind of question and answer, and even to the level of challenging. And that's what the Seder is about. And we're encouraged to like, yes, ask the four questions at the beginning, but tell me what other questions you have. You're invited to ask all the questions you have. This is the night of questions. We're telling our story, right? And together with that, we're asking questions to get to the heart of the story. Now, think about just to talk about like Israel again for a second. The modern success of Israel, and specifically with its high tech innovations, is based on this ancient traditional way of Jewish education. Right? People talk about this all the time. Like Americans who come to Israel to like work with like their Israeli counterparts, so like Microsoft or like whatever other high tech company, they're always blown away by a couple of things. First, how casually the Israelis dress to the office, right? There's like dress down Friday, in Israel it's like dress down every day, and also the way that they question authority, the way that they question their superiors, and they're invited to, they're allowed to, as part of the culture in Israel, right? Why? Because everyone wants the best. Everyone wants the best solution, the best, answer to a challenge, and that's achieved through this kind of all of us together working on this, and yes, even challenging each other. Even if you're like a newbie on the staff and you're challenging the superior, if it's for the sake of success, of achievement, of getting that answer, it's totally fine. Right? And that's built into Israeli culture. And many people talk about how that's one of the biggest reasons why Israel has been so successful in a majorly disproportionate way, right, in the high tech industry, right, because of that. Right? Just kind of related to modern day times. Okay. So this is a little bit about right the questions that we're invited to ask at the Seder, right, with the unique mitzvah that we have of telling the story, right, so that we and right all present at the Seder, really get our history, get where we come from, right? To be proud of where we come from, right? And again, to invite people to take part in that telling of that story through questions, through answers, through discussion, through exploration. Make it alive, right? Make it interesting, make it captivating. It's a very, very big idea behind the Seder, okay? To go to a couple other specific parts and like what we can kind of extract from it and what we can learn from it, right at the beginning, after at the very beginning, I'm sorry, of the Seder, we say these words halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction, right? When we're talking about the matzah, of course. Okay, a big part of the Seder, of course, is understanding. Yeah, like we went through hardship. We went through hard times. We were oppressed. We were slaves. Don't ever forget that. The Torah mentions dozens and dozens of times, reminds us dozens of times, don't forget that you were slaves in Egypt, right? Don't forget you were slaves in Egypt. Why does the Torah have to tell me dozens of times? Literally dozens of times, right? One of the best answers I've heard to that question is so we never forget where we came from, so that our eyes and hearts will be open to oppression happening in our generation. Right? We know what it means. Not only 3,000 plus years ago, let's be honest, right? My grandparents know what it means to be oppressed. People in our generation still know what it means to be oppressed. Okay, right now, as we're talking, there are still hostages sitting in the most horrific, cruel, barbaric conditions in Gaza. And we're going to talk more about them in a moment. We unfortunately are not exempt. I remember when I was a kid, literally, I remember as a kid, I wasn't so connected Jewishly as a kid. That happened later on after college. But still, I knew enough about anti-Semitism and things like that. I'm like, wow, we're the first generation not to experience anti-Semitism. Right? That's what I thought as a kid. And now, a couple of decades later, it's one of the worst times in America and in other parts of the world when it comes to anti-Semitism. How did it get there? It's like this thing that never goes away. We know what it means to deal with hate, with anti-Semitism, with oppression, with cruelty. We know. Now we don't have to go back 3,000 years ago. But we have to understand that at our root, like literally part of the formation of our nation was intertangled with this oppression that we experience. And of course, the freedom from that, that's like the big story of the night, is that we're free from that. But don't just take it as your own enjoyment. Don't just say, yay, we're free, and now, okay, good to go, I'm good to go. No, right? Why does the Torah mention dozens and dozens of times? So that if I see oppression in any kind of way, in any kind of form or shape for any kind of people, in my generation, when I'm alive, I should hopefully be motivated to do something about it. Now, of course, we can't do something about everything. There's so many problems in the world, but to do something, to do what I can do. And if we all do what we can do, we can make a major, major difference. Think about it, right? Maybe some of people here even like part of like the whole civil rights movement, right? It's been told many times that Jews were like at the forefront, right, of that movement. Why? They saw like horrible oppression happen in their own country to human beings. They're made like in the divine image of God. There's no way I'm going to sit down. There's no way I'm going to be quiet and let that happen. When I went to college, right, I was very active in the activist movement. My college probably had 30% Jews, which is pretty high for a college, right? 30% Jews, but literally any protest, any rally, any activist meeting was like 70%, 80% Jews. It's in our DNA, right? Like we want to make a difference. We want to help. Whatever. We're good people. And we want the world to be a good place for all people, Jews and non-Jews alike. And that really is rooted in this story of Pesach, of Passover. Right? We're telling the story that how it's our halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. This is the bread that we ate, right? As slaves. Now that's an interesting point. You might be asking, wait a minute, don't we say that's the bread that we ate after we were freed from slavery? So then why are we saying halach ma'anya? This is the bread of our affliction. So we learned something very interesting. Sorry if I'm talking very quickly. I'm from New York. Okay. And when I get excited, I talk even quicker. We learned that the matzah, or matzah-like bread, was not only the bread that we ate upon leaving Egypt because we didn't have time for the dough to rise, that was also the bread that we ate as slaves. Halach ma'anya. This is the bread of our affliction. And a beautiful insight into that is that the same bread that was our slavery, was our oppression, became the bread of our redemption. Right? That was transformed through the pain, through the bondage, right? We became free. We became free. Right? And that's symbolized by the fact that we ate the same bread both as slaves and as free people. Right? Yeah, I mean, there's this deep, deep idea. Sometimes it's really hard to kind of like wrap our heads around it. But like for some reason that needed it to happen. That's like a whole spiritual conversation we do not need to have. If you don't connect to it, I totally understand. We don't need to go there. But just to throw it out. There is this idea that like, can we say, should we say, I don't know, like, everything happens for a reason. We see that in the story of Egypt, of our slavery. Like, why did we have to become slaves in the first place? What did we do wrong? Did we do anything wrong? No, we're like barely even a nation yet. Right? But there's one idea that's shared that like we need to go through that experience in order to become the people we were meant to become. Right? To become the nation we were meant to become. And on this level that we're talking about right now, to have open hearts, right, to all the different kinds of oppression that all the different kinds of people experience in the world, and to really be a light into the nations in any way, in every way that we possibly can. right? And then that's expressed right away. And the next thing that we say after that line, we say kol dichfin, right? We say anyone who's hungry, we invite them to eat. That's like the next thing out of our mouth at the Seder, which is kind of like a weird thing to say because like we're already at the Seder. I already made all the food. I already invited my guests. Like what? I'm going to open up my door and just like start screaming out to the whole community. Whoever doesn't have a place for the Seder, come now. Shouldn't I have done that before? Right? Why am I mentioning that at the Seder? Call dichfin. Like anyone who's like, hungry, doesn't have a place, come into my house. It seems like a little bit of like not totally true. Right? But there's this idea, and I learned it from this beautiful teacher from Israel, who says, yeah, so it might not be technically possible right now to like invite everyone, doesn't have a place, but I want you to know my heart is so open on this night, right? That I'm inviting everyone. That's the kind of heart that I'm experiencing right now. On Pesach night, the Leil Seder, the night of the Seder, we are celebrating our freedom. We're so joyous about the freedom that we experienced thousands of years ago, right? That we want people to know, right? That I'm so joyous and so celebrating that my heart is so open, right? An open heart is like the most perfect sign that I'm happy about being free. And I want to share that with you. I want to share that with everybody. So that's why we say these words at the very beginning of the Seder. Again, even if it's not technically possible, just to show how open my heart is. That if I could, I would invite the entire world into my house right now, right? To sit together, right, in this Seder. That's the kind of like feeling we're supposed to have. Right? We're encouraged to have like the really, elevated feeling at the Seder of joy, of happiness. I heard this for the first time this year. I thought it was so beautiful that, sometimes something happens to you. You have this experience maybe at the store, on the road, or whatever. You bump into somebody, whatever it might be, right? A million different examples could be. And you just need to tell somebody the story. Like you can't go on with your day until you tell somebody the story. Maybe you call them, maybe you bump into them, or like go to their whatever it is. Maybe leave a WhatsApp message. I don't know. The story is so like, oh, you just can't like do anything else until you tell the story. That's how we're supposed to feel at Pesach night, at Seder night. That we're just so excited to tell this story. It's such an important story to us. We can't wait to tell it. Right? That's how we're feeling about it. Okay. Um, okay, Tov. So we started talking about this before. We'll add a little bit onto it, right? That we said before that a big part of the Seder is telling the story specifically to the youth, to the next generation, in a way that they can hear it and receive it and internalize it. And we see that very much in the part of the story of the Seder of the Haggadah, where we mention the four sons. Right? We have the wise one, the evil one, the simple one, the one who doesn't know how to ask questions. And typically, the classic, if you ever like, who wants to be the wise one? Who wants to be the evil one? Everyone's like, I want to be the wise one, And everyone like, thinks the wise one is the best. And we'll get back to that in a second. But the classic understanding of the four different sons is exactly this point that we brought up. That there's different kinds of kids out there. There's different kinds of people. And they each need to hear this story or just anything about life, about Judaism, in a way that they can understand being who they are uniquely, right? That it's not like one size fits all. The Jewish approach to education is not one size fits all. That's for the most part what Western education became, right? One teacher telling one way, and hopefully you can learn it from me, and if not, you're going to get a 63 on the test, right? That's not Jewish education. Jewish education is understanding the child, right? Who they are, where they're at, and what they need to hear and how they need to hear in order to connect, in order to understand, making it very specialized, very unique, very specific. And we see that with the four sons. But then there's something else I saw from a teacher who says, you know what? It's not even really four different sons. It's really four different stages of a person's development. It's really talking about one person going through different stages of life. Right? There's the chacham, there's the wise one. He thinks everything's about understanding and knowledge. I know it all, right? The more information I have, the better I am. Not so much, right? In Judaism, it teaches that knowledge without positive action, right, or knowledge without humility leads to sin. Interesting, because the very next one is the Rasha, is the evil one. So if someone's solely focused on just the accumulation of knowledge, right, that's most likely not going to bring that person to a good place. They're going to fall. They're going to have like a spiritual fall. They're going to become a Rasha, God forbid, but like somewhat wicked. right? And then the hope is that then they're going to realize, oh my God, what happened? I was using knowledge in the wrong way, right? Let's kind of like redo this. Let's rethink this. Do something we call in Hebrew tshuva, like repentance. Like let's realign ourselves, and then they become more simple. Not like in a bad way, not like in a I don't understand anything kind of way. In a very very deep way, in a humble way, right? And then they get to this place of like not knowing how to ask a question, which also seems on the surface like, oh, he doesn't understand anything. Oh, Nebuch, I need to help him. Like, okay. No, there's this place where, you know what? It's like such a high level of understanding. I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions. Right? And of course, we said before, questions are good. We encourage questions. There's a great place for questions. But there is also this really beautiful and even elevated spiritual place of like, you know what? I don't have any questions. Right? But that only comes after like spiritual work and spiritual growth and personal development, right? So just wanted to give like a little kind of different understanding, insight into the four sons. The other major classic unique thing about the Pesach Seder is the eating. Okay? So we have this unique mitzvah of telling the story, and we tell the story. Most of the Seder is the telling of the story. Okay, the part called Magid, where we're telling the story of the Exodus of the Mitzrayim. And again, we're encouraged to be creative and ask questions and go away from the text and have discussions and do all kinds of other things to get everyone involved, right? And it's interesting, right? It also says that this is not a ritual of the accumulation of knowledge, right? Connected to what we just said, because it says it in the text of the Haggadah. Even people are super wise and knowing and understanding, they still need to tell the story, because this telling that we're doing on Seder night is more about the heart than about the mind. It's about connecting us. It's about reconnecting us. It's about strengthening that connection. So even if you've told the story, most likely most of us have, so many times, even dozens of times, we tell it again, right? To keep on strengthening our connection to who we are and our roots and our people and our vision and our mission and why we're here and what's unique about us and what's beautiful about us and what we can never ever like give up or give in about. The Pesach Seder literally kind of holds the secret for Jewish continuity, right? It really holds the secret for the Jewish future, connecting to us to our roots and understanding of why we're here in the first place, right? And what we have to do in this world, right? Uniquely as the Jewish nation, all right? But again, going to the other unique part of the Seder is the eating, okay? We know that after we tell the story, we eat the matzah. Right, we've already drank 1 cup of wine. We'll drink another cup of wine. We'll have 2 more cups of wine later on. Okay, but we'll eat the matzah. And when we do eat the matzah, we say the regular hamotzi lechem min haaretz on it because it's like the bread of Passover, right? The bread of the meal. But we also say a blessing, another blessing, a second blessing on it, which we never do any other time of the year, which is Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has sanctified us through, right? The mitzvot, and commanded us to eat the matzah. The matzah that we eat at the Seder is on the level of a mitzvah. It's the only time of the year that eating is actually a mitzvah in Judaism. Now, of course, we need to eat to survive. And we're encouraged to eat on Shabbat as part of our pleasure of Shabbat, of course. But it's not on the level of mitzvah. This is a mitzvah directly from the Torah to eat matzah on the Seder night. Right? And so it's interesting because, on the surface, we think of mitzvah like it's a commandment. I do it because I'm commanded. I have to. It's an obligation. So, okay, I don't have a choice. But on a deeper level, and Judaism always has those deeper levels, the idea of a mitzvah is the idea of connection, right? Of connecting to whatever, maybe people have different ideas, different beliefs here. It's totally fine. But if you believe in God, like connecting to God, right? A mitzvah is an opportunity to connect to God. And we have all different kinds of mitzvot, right? 613 of them. And one of them is eating matzah on the Seder night. So what am I doing on the deeper level when I eat the matzah? I'm having this opportunity for a spiritual experience. It's an opportunity to connect to God through eating. The most physical action you can possibly think of. The most like normal day-to-day action you can possibly think of. Eating. Something we do multiple times a day, every day, day after day. Yet on the Seder night, right, it becomes elevated. On Seder night, it becomes holy. Right? On Seder night, the eating that we do with the matzah specifically becomes spiritual. Okay? And so that's another thing again that makes the Pesach Seder unique is that the eating that we do of the matzah specifically, and then right afterwards the mahor, right, which is supposed to remind us of the bitterness that our people went through, okay, is on the level of mitzvah. We have a commandment from the Torah to eat these things, right? And it's a whole different kind of experience of eating, or at least could be. Now, before we get to our last part, which is to focus on the hostages, which is very, very important, I just want to say this, that another major theme of the Seder is that we're meant to and we're encouraged to, experience it, tell the story as if we're going through it, not like somebody else's story, not like something from the ancient past, but like we're telling our story. So how can we tell a story of oppression, slavery, and bondage when, thank God, like we didn't go through it? Two ways. One is, let's be honest, all of us are dealing with some kind of bondage, slavery, oppression on some level. It can take many different forms. In our modern day world, all kinds of addictions, all kinds of things that just can't, break free from. I know it's not good for me, but I'm still, bringing it into my life, whatever those things might be. Maybe certain negative patterns of thinking, maybe negative views of ourselves, right? Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. We were being freed from Egypt. We're being freed from Mitzrayim. The word Mitzrayim in Hebrew, which again is Egypt, the root of that word is constricted, constriction. We were being freed from a place of constriction. Yes, in those days, over 3,000 years ago, the form of that was slavery, servitude, bondage, all that. But where do we have constriction in our own lives today? Every single one of us has some kind of form of some kind of constriction. Right? Maybe again, I'm just throwing out all different kinds of examples of what it could be. It could be like I have such a hard time not getting angry, or I have a hard time not getting jealous, or whatever the patterns of thoughts that we have in our minds. Thinking positively about myself, right? All these different things. On the Passover Seder, not that we're supposed to dwell on these things, but to realize, okay, I want to be free of those things as well, here and now, in this generation, right now, me. I'm also part of the story. So we're not just telling an ancient story, we're supposed to look at ourselves as also being freed, as part of this nation that was freed thousands of years ago, but also in a personal way, in a spiritual way, right? Yeah, I got my constrictions, my bondage, my slavery that I also need to be freed from. Let's be honest, right? And the second way, which is very unique to these past couple of years, is thinking about our people, our own people, who are right now, right, literally being held as slaves, as captives, in bondage, still, right, since October 7th, 2023, right, by the hands of evil monsters. And we've heard from the hostages who have been freed, but the horrific conditions that they were held in, and those still there, right? What they're going through every single day. I'm sure many of you guys do this as well. I can't tell you how many times. I was just hiking with my son today in the south of Israel, this beautiful place, and having an amazing time and so joyous and so thankful for this experience. And at some point, I'm thinking like, wow, like as I'm doing this, my own people, they're people, dozens of them, in who knows what conditions in Gaza, being held by these monsters. So when we talk about it in this, not even in our generation, in this year, 2025, just like last year, 2024, unfortunately, we're doing it again. Right? We don't have to think so far about like what does it mean to be freed from bondage, right? To be freed from slavery. In fact, there's a couple editions of a special Haggadah. I have one of them. There's another one that they put out since October 7th, that includes the traditional text of the Haggadah, along with words and commentary and quotes from hostage families, from hostages themselves who are freed. And they give a whole nother level of meaning and context, and I'll even say inspiration and heart, even if it's a broken heart, to our Seders. We cannot have the normal Seder this year, just like we couldn't have the normal Seder last year, right? Because when we sit down to celebrate freedom, which we're meant to do and we should do with joy and celebration, we should absolutely. It's not going to be the same as 2 years ago because we know there are our own brothers and sisters, right? At this point, brothers who are not free. They're literally not free. They're being held in the hands of our evil, evil enemies. And we're praying every single day for the return. They're not yet returned. They're not yet home. And just to bring them in on some level, in some way, to our Seder. Some people have a chair that's empty, a yellow chair with the yellow ribbon on it, or something, a plate set for a hostage, right? At our Seder tables to remember them, to bring them in. Have names, maybe read their names, maybe read something about them, maybe read something that one of the freed hostages have said since their release. There's so many things that we have heard from hostages upon their release. Okay, and I just want to share with you, a couple of things. There's so many things, but just for the sake of time, just a couple of things, right? This is a man named Chaim Yellen, who was saved on October 7th from Be'eri, right? One of the kibbutzim in the south that got heavily attacked on October 7th. No, I'm sorry, not Be'eri, near Oz, another kibbutz. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here. I'm reading the wrong thing. Sorry. Hold on. He was from Beirut, the first thing I said, sorry. And he was saved that day. And he says, his own words, he says, this year, me and my community members who were saved from the attack of October 7th and went out of our safe rooms alive, right? We felt on our flesh, I'm translating from his Hebrew words, we felt on our flesh, right, as if we left Egypt. We went from slavery to freedom, even in those few hours. Probably felt like eternity, like forever, right? We felt like we went from slavery, from bondage to freedom, from darkness to a great light. And in the merit, he says, of the soldiers that protected us with their bodies and took us out of there. But he says, right, the Pesach Seder that we will celebrate this year, lo yeshalem, will not be complete, right? Will not be complete in any house as long as there's still hostages who are not able to sit at a table, right, with us for Pesach. So yes, we're supposed to celebrate and be joyous and be happy. And at the same time, which is such a Jewish thing, think about it, such a Jewish thing, right? We cannot forget those who at this moment, right, not able to celebrate with us or at all. Okay? Them and their families and their communities. And we should really bring that into the Seder, right? So again, there's a couple of different versions, two that I know of. If you just Google hostage Haggadah, you'll come to the one that I don't have most likely. This is the one I do have, obviously. I'm holding it in my hands. There's another one, very powerful as well, okay, that has quotes and commentary from either freed hostages or hostage families. I want to share a couple other things, and then if people have any questions, I'd be happy to take. We have heard unbelievable things from the released hostages. Of course, the pain and suffering and the brutality and the horrors that they experienced, of course. At the same time, I couldn't say this if they didn't say it themselves, right? But the great light, I know it sounds crazy to say, they said it themselves in different ways, in different words. The great light that they experienced in that darkness. There are multiple stories, and I highly encourage you, if you haven't heard them already, to go search on Google and YouTube, hear them, read them for yourselves. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a woman named Sapir Cohen. She was released in the first release in 2023. She has told her story numerous times, both in Hebrew and in English. You can find her telling her story in English, hear it from her. I don't want to even try to tell her story. I'll just tell you this about it. That when she got taken as a hostage, she right away understood that for whatever reason, I know this sounds crazy, I could never say it if she didn't say it herself. She said, and this is part of a bigger story that you just need to hear from her. She said, I understood right away that this is where I need to be for some reason. And while I'm there, while I'm hostage, I'm going to do my very best, right, to be positive and help all those around me get through this in the best way possible. And that's exactly what she did. She was like this positive force, this light in the worst darkness you could ever imagine, right? And that's how not only she survived it, but how she was throughout it, helping all those other hostages who are around her. That's the pure Cohen. That's just a small bit of her story. Go hear it for yourself on YouTube. You'll hear it in her telling it in English. Other people, Omer Shem Tov, right, who recently got released, a young kid going to a party, getting taken hostage for over 500 days, right? Of course, he went through horrors we can't even understand, can't even explain, can't even articulate. And at the same time, I don't know if you saw the ceremony when he came out, his smile was beaming. And I saw a video of his friends and family seeing him. He was like, that's Omer. That's the Omer we know. Somehow, even through all the darkness, through all the oppression, through all the pain and suffering, he was able to retain his Omer, who he was, right? And he says, and he's been interviewed, since, he said, miracles happened to me. Miracles happened to me while I was in there. How can he say such a thing? He said it. I can't say it. He said it. One of the miracles he said, somehow he got a bottle of grape juice. I have no idea how, maybe I missed that part of his story. Look it up yourself. He got a bottle of grape juice. He said two miracles happened. One, it didn't go bad the entire time I was in captivity, and it didn't go, and it didn't, I didn't use it all up. I was able to use a little bit of it every Friday night, and he made Kiddush, Shabbat Kiddush on this grape juice in the Hamas captivity every single week. Okay? That's unbelievable, right? There is this, idea of, there's a part of the Seder where we say, Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves. And this is one of those things that's like not easy to say. But when we hear that from Omer Shem Tov, it makes it a little bit easier. That on Pesach night, Passover night, we're not only celebrating our freedom, we're celebrating. I don't know if the celebrating is the right word, but on some level, we're recognizing the entire experience from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light. This whole thing happened, and we're recognizing the whole thing. Right? Omer Shem Tov, upon coming out, is doing the same thing. He's recognizing the darkness, the brutality, the horror that he experienced. And at the same time, within all that, he's experiencing or sharing. He's recognizing the light even in that darkness. Right? On some level, I know this is a crazy thing to say, but please excuse me for even saying it. Right? But again, if we didn't hear these stories from the hostages themselves, I wouldn't say it. On some level, they're like, of course, they're different people as a result of what they went through. But on some level, they're like more themselves than ever before because of that experience. And again, we never would ever, ever, ever wish that experience for anybody. But it happened. They went through it. It's part of their story now. Right? And they themselves are seeing the light in that darkness. That's Judaism. That's being Jewish. That's Passover. That's Pesach. That's the Pesach Seder. And the last thing I'll share with you guys is this. Again, from another hostage that was who was recently released, Liri Albag, who you probably have seen on the news, on interview somewhere. Right? She was like a lioness. Right? She was like doing in captivity. She was told that she was being freed, and one of her friends was being left behind. She did her very best. She told the hostages, no, I'm not going out. You take her. I'll stay behind. Right? She did everything to stay behind and let this girl go out before her. And the only way she got out is because they tricked her. They tricked her into thinking that they were going to let her stay and take this other girl instead. That's the only way she got out, actually. She was willing to give up her freedom for this other hostage. I mean, like, but that's not the only thing. The main thing I want to tell you about Leary is she said, in an interview after her release, she said, we tried our very best. Right? She was one of the tatzpaniot. She was one of the female soldiers that were the observers of the security screens that were taken captive, a whole group of them. And she said, we tried to keep the holidays, the Jewish holidays, the best we could. She said before Sukkot, we made decorations and put them around our room. Before Hanukkah, we tried to trick the terrorists into giving us candles, right? On Yom Kippur, we fasted, right? And we didn't use electricity. What? Huh? In captivity? What? And then she said for Pesach, she said in the days leading up to Pesach, somehow they knew when the holidays were coming up. She said she put together in her mind this Haggadah. She put together her own Haggadah in her mind, and on Pesach night, on Seder night itself, right? They sat together and she told over the Haggadah that she put together in her mind in Hamas captivity, right? To kind of bring it all together, we start the Seder, we said at the beginning of this class, Manishtana halayla zeh, right? Why is this night different than all of the other nights? I think this year, in addition to that question, we need to say, why is this Seder different than all other Seders? Why is the Seder this year different than all other Seders from previous years? And the reason is, very clearly, right? Because our people have been through really intense, horrific experiences in our day and age in the last 2 years, and there are our own fellow Jews who are still going through it. Therefore, right, there's no way our Seder could be like just any other year. Our Seders have to be different. Yes, we're going to read the text. Yes, we're going to say the word questions. Yes, we're going to eat the matzah. Yes, we're going to eat the maror. And we're going to have a whole nother level to the experience because of what our people have been through and what our people are still going through. Okay, and I highly encourage everyone in their own way, right, to find a way to bring that into their traditional Pesach Seder experience, right, highlighting the uniqueness of this year. With that, I just want to thank you all for being here, for attending. Thanks for the invite to share again, as we're just about a week away before Pesach. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them, if there are any, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Thank you so much, Akiva. Enlightening as always. It's getting my wheels turning, and I know probably a lot of the other people's. If anyone has a question, I think I answered the one question that was in the chat about the Haggadot. I think, Akiva, you have the one where we can make a donation, I think, to American Zionist Movement, and they'll send us that one. And there's another one,
Yeah,
Bring Them Home website.
yeah.
Do you recommend one over another?
They're both really good. Either one. Yeah, they're both powerful. Both powerful, I should say.
I have a question. It's
Yeah,
kind
go
of
for
a
it.
combination of something I've always wondered about and then comparing it to today. Can I ask you a question about Dayenu?
Yeah, for
Okay, so
sure.
we always say Dayenu and we say, if God had just done this or that, it would have been enough. If he had split the sea for us and had not taken us through it to dry land, it would have been enough. But would it? Didn't every part of Dayenu need to take place for it to have been enough? And then relating to today, like let's say Hamas came to the table and listened to the deal, but didn't accept it, which has happened. Would that have been enough? If the hostages were brought to the stage and we saw them on TV, but they weren't brought to Israel, would that have been enough? If the hostages come back, but Hamas isn't destroyed, would that be enough? I feel like each of these things needs to happen for it to be enough. So could you speak to that?
Right, that's a very, very good question. In terms of the modern day parallel to that, that's a hard one to answer, I'll be honest with you, because I
Right.
don't think it's right.
It's not
It's
enough.
not
No.
it's not
Yeah.
enough until
No.
all the hostages are freed and Hamas is no more.
Correct.
In terms of the traditional text of the Haggadah, I think the main point there is something in Hebrew we call hakarat hatov, which is recognizing the good,
Right.
right? And it's like, yes, of course, the ultimate is like getting out of Egypt and getting to Israel and being a nation, with our mission and our, and our peoplehood in our land, of course. But you know what? There's so many smaller things along the way that we need to be thankful for. That without this thing, this couldn't have happened. Without that thing, that couldn't have. Recognizing like the kind of like the chain of events, that it wasn't just one big blast. It was many different things, and being thankful for every single step because it teaches us the importance, which is a major value in Judaism, of being thankful. So it's kind of like saying, right, like, wow, if you only did that for me, Dayenu, like that would have been enough to be so filled with gratitude. And of course, I wanted the whole thing, and we got the whole thing, of course. But it's like teaching us, to really have gratitude for each little step of the way, right? And training us to be people who are grateful people. I think that's a major idea behind it.
Thank you. Harry asked a question in the chat. Do you think the best teachers are the ones who use the Socratic method of asking questions?
I think it's a great method. Oftentimes when I was in the classroom teaching about like if people students ask me questions, I ask them questions back. I think it's a great um, form of engagement and going deeper and getting people involved. Um, when I was going for my master's degree in Jewish education, I had one professor who he said this all the time. He's like, if you can't reach every single student, right? Meaning like every kind of student, you have no right to be a Jewish educator. It was like an intense thing to say, and a lot of people gave him like kind of kickback. But I remember sitting through this class, I'm like, he's right. Like, like ideally, like that's what we're here to do, right? And so I think, asking, questions or, giving over things in certain kinds of ways in order to reach every single kind of student, every single kind of Jewish child really is what we're meant to do, both as educators, as community leaders, as parents, and just, being part of the Jewish people. I think you're on mute.
Are there any other questions? Surely we don't know everything about Pesach. Feel free to unmute if you have one.
Why do we drink 4 cups of wine? I forgot.
The main reason is that it's parallel to the four different languages of redemption talked about in the Torah. Being taken out, being, taken and removed and redeemed. There's four different verbs that the Torah uses when it's telling that we were, freed from Egypt. So those 4 cups are parallel to that.
Is there anything else that people... Oh, I'm sorry. Barry, were you trying to say something? We couldn't hear.
You put a phone number up there briefly. Could you put that phone number up again so we could take it down?
What phone
It
number?
flashed in the box there, a phone number to call to get a Hagana.
It's not a phone number. I gave you two different links that you'd have to
There was
push.
a link and then there was a phone number.
The phone
Sorry.
number is somebody's name on here. They're calling from their
Okay.
iPhone. It's
Thank
not
you.
something for you to
Thank you.
call.
Thank you.
Akiva, I was wondering, and maybe you said this and I missed it. Is there anything else, given what's happening right now, that we is recommended we add to our Seder plate?
Um, it's a good question. Again, like, there is, space even traditionally for creativity and our own, personal expression. I think people can do that in different kinds of ways. Look, we've been through and we're still going through obviously, but we've been through a lot, since October 7th, 2023. So I think, bringing in memories of those who, were killed on October 7th, those hostages who didn't make it out alive, right? Those who, again, obviously who are still there, those who haven't released. There's so many different ways that we could connect to this story and to what's been happening in our people. So it could be pictures, it could be things that like represent them. Like I'm just thinking like Hirsch Goldberg, the sports team that he liked. A quote that he said, it was recently shared. The quote from Viktor Frankl. Like it says like someone who has like meaning in their life, something to like hold on to can overcome anything. And he said that to a fellow hostage who was released and said that saved his life in captivity. Hirsch, who didn't make it out alive, right, by sharing that idea with another hostage, helped him get out alive. It's like, so there's so many different things we can do. Again, from, pictures and like a sports, shirt or a quote or something, telling, you asked me about putting things on the table, but even like maybe like reading a little bit about some of the hostages or some of the people who, I mean, we didn't even talk about. There's so much to talk about. There's always so much more, but the people who came on October 7th, they weren't down there, but in seconds they got ready on their own. Nobody asked them to. They heard what was going on and they rushed down there and they fought. And some of those people fought for days and made it out alive, and some of those people fought for days and didn't make it out alive. You know how many stories there are of people who did back and forth, staving, people from the Nova Festival, from the kibbutzim, and then the seventh time that they did it, they were killed by a Hamas terrorist. So telling those stories. I have a book at home, and this might be a more direct answer to your question. I have a book at home, and it was recently translated into English. It's called A Day in October, or One Day in October, right? Yom Echad October, right? So One Day in October, and it's 40, I think it's 40 stories from 40 different people, compiled by these two people of just unbelievable bravery on October 7th. Right, just unbelievable things that people did. Either people who lived on the kibbutzim, or people who came down to help them, like all kinds of stories of just like beyond bravery. And to bring some of those stories, and again, it's translated into English. You can find it online. To bring some of those stories into our Haggadah, we're telling the story of our people on Seder night, and these stories from October 7th, right? Yeah, good. These are the stories of our people. People have said so many times, and I've felt the same way, that we're going to need a new book of the Hebrew Bible, because of everything that's happened since October 7th. Really, we're just, of course, horrible things, but also unbelievable bravery, unbelievable expressions of strength, unbelievable expressions of unity, of love, between one Jew and another. It's like historical. It's epic what we're living through right now, and to bring some of those, even a couple of those stories into our Seder, I think will elevate it to a very high level.
You. Miriam is asking, is it not a mitzvah to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread after, I guess, the Seder?
It is, but that becomes just not eating chametz. It
Right.
is a mitzvah. It is not a mitzvah to eat matzah. So right after the Seder, the rest of the mitzvahs don't eat chametz, right? So you can't eat bread, you can't eat crackers, cookies, whatever. You can eat Pesach cookies, right? But it's not like the obligation of eating matzah. Of course, we eat matzah, like eat matzah with this and eat matzah with that, of course, because like that's what we have, right? We don't have bread. But there's a differentiation that on Seder night, that's like the mitzvah of eating matzah, and the rest of the week, obviously including the first day as well, is about just not eating chametz.
Okay. Gail asks, and she's asking not regarding herself, but for others, and I've never heard this, but how do you celebrate Pesach if you don't believe in the Exodus? It's
It's a
interesting.
very good question. So I heard that question years ago, and I heard a really great answer. It's not my answer, but I really, really love it. So I'll share it. Even if you don't believe it, even if you don't believe any of this stuff, right? Our people, the Jewish people, we're real. We exist. We know that. We go back thousands of years, right? And we as a people, whether you believe it happened or it didn't happen, whether you believe our stories are divine in origin or not, we've decided as a people that these are the stories that we're telling our children, right? And then when they become the adults, they're going to tell their children. These are the stories that we have decided to pass on as a people. Why? Because there are lessons, there are values embedded in these stories, right, that are crucial to give over to the next generation. So even if we don't believe that it ever happened, the story itself, right, is so powerful, right? It's so important. It's such a meaningful and significant story, and a vessel, we can say, almost like a vessel through which to teach the values to the next generation that we want them to hold on to, that we want to pass on to them.
This is sort of unrelated to this, but sort of related, I guess. Frank is asking, what's the best way to learn conversational Hebrew?
Um, I guess go find a website. I'm not sure. There's lots of great YouTube videos out there. But
Duolingo, move
yeah,
to
well, there's
Israel.
lots of resources today.
Israel, make some Israeli friends. I don't know. There's something like cafe,
Oh yeah, I heard of that. Something, yeah,
supposed to be
Oh, it's
good.
called
yeah.
Citizen Cafe,
It is in
but
cafe, yeah.
but then after a fashion, then you have to start paying.
Well, sure. Yeah. Sounds like you
But
need to make some Israeli
I'm
friends.
really asking because he's from the United States originally.
Ah, ah.
So how did Akiva learn Hebrew?
Well, I moved to Israel over 20 years ago with no Hebrew whatsoever, and I did something called Ulpan. When you make Aliyah, when you move to Israel, they give you 5 months of free, an intensive Hebrew course. It's 5 months, 5 days a week, 5 hours a day. I did it twice. So that was like a total of 250 hours of intensive Hebrew education. That was a good start. And then just from living here, you listen to Israelis, how they form sentences, what words they use, making mistakes, not being embarrassed, looking up words, in your dictionary. And after, some time, you feel you get to a point where, you can understand your electric bill and you can order things in restaurants and you can even laugh at jokes told in Hebrew. That's the best. That's when you know you've reached a certain level. My Hebrew will never be as good as my English, but it's definitely, coming from nothing, thank God. Like I can totally survive here and converse with Israelis in Hebrew. It's very nice.
How do you get over the speed in which Israelis speak to each other?
Yeah, that's still sometimes hard, to be honest with you. There's some Israelis who speak at a normal pace, and I'm like, oh, I wish every Israeli spoke like you, because then I can understand everything. There's still some people who speak so fast that I don't understand everything they say, I'll be honest with you. It's
So
just
this
how it.
question is for Alana. When the volunteers for Israel volunteer site, they do have a
Of course.
discount code. It's called Opan Or. Do you know anybody that's gone through that, and is it helpful?
I don't. Um, so I can't answer that. I just know people were requesting it. But Steve might know. It's a good question for Steve when he gets back.
I knew somebody who went on that Alpan.
Okay.
They were somebody who lived in Israel and decided to come for a volunteers for a SAR-L program, and they thought it was a good beginning step. That's what it is. It's a beginning step. You have to continue learning after that, but that's what they told me.
Yeah.
Can I jump in and ask a question?
Sure.
And it's going back to the Seder itself. So, as an American Jew, I went to Hebrew school, and other than like Sheket Bavakasha, there's
Okay.
very little that I actually took out of it. Yet I go to a Seder where much of it is recited in Hebrew, and it's very familiar to me, and I understand the tunes, and I like singing along. But the reality is I haven't a clue what I'm listening to. So Akiva is saying the idea is to tell the story so the next generation. Well, I know my next generation is learning Hebrew the same way I learned it, which is basically, you say Baruch Atah Adonai, and that you understand, or maybe the Shema you understand, but very little else. Uh, so that brings around, why would we not be doing all of this in the language that we understand rather than Hebrew, which we all consider as the holy language, but in reality is a language that goes right over our heads for most of us, or at least for me. I shouldn't say most of us. Anyhow, I'll leave that to Akiva to respond.
No, it's a great question, and I think the answer is very simple. You should be saying the Haggadah in English. That's it. Straight
Yeah,
up.
Norman.
Yeah,
I am like you. I went to the same generation of Hebrew school learning. I learned how to read. I can read very, very
right,
well, considering I haven't got a clue what I'm saying.
right.
So I make sure I have a book that always has Hebrew and English, so I can look at the English to figure out what's going on. Then the Seders that I've been to over the last decade or two, the people who are running the Seder, we do stuff in Hebrew and only Hebrew. And then for the story, when we start with Avodim Fayinu, we don't say Avodim Fayinu. We go and we read the English and we take turns reading paragraphs.
Right.
So it's a matter of changing the tradition or the custom at your Seder table.
So this comment is towards Norman. There's a book. It's called Art Scroll Haggadah. It gives like various levels of explanation in the in different columns. I think it'd be a great book for you. But when you're looking at translating Hebrew into English, I read the Siddur all the time, And sometimes the translations are not the same. They
Right.
mean completely different things.
I have a question for Akiva.
Great.
You said
Let's make
Passover.
this the last question. I'll read this one because I know Akiva has to go. Akiva, do you have
Okay.
time for one more?
Yeah, we have time for one more question for sure.
Great. Go ahead,
Oh,
Shay.
so my question is, I was learning Tractate Pesach, and they were talking about the fact that you're not supposed to eat before the Seder. So when the Yemenite Jews eat their karpas, their greens, does that not count as eating before the Seder, or is that like just a tradition from Yemen and it's okay for them to do it because they weren't part of Talmud Bavli?
Well, that's the karpas that they're eating is already part of the Seder, right? The Seder has begun. When they say don't to eat before the Seder, there's two things. There's an idea of not eating matzah before the day before the Seder. So you eat matzah with appetite and excitement. And then you shouldn't have like a real full meal before the Seder so that you can actually eat, again, with fulfillment at the Seder. If you have snacks, fruit, whatever, that's totally fine. But once I get to the karpas, so that's already part of the Seder. There are some people who say, if you want to get into technical Jewish law, there are some people who say you should only eat a little bit, a little amount, of the karpas, so it doesn't require an after blessing. But then there's other people who say it doesn't matter, you can eat as much as you want because when you do the Birkat Hamazon, the blessing over the after blessing of the meal, that kind of covers it. So from that perspective, it's totally fine that they, munch on the karpas. I know the Ashkenazim don't do that, but if you wanted to keep eating like your karpas, your potatoes, whatever it is, throughout the Seder, technically you're totally allowed to, because you're in the Seder itself, and you've already said the blessing over that. So yeah,
Thank you.
for
Akiva, there
sure.
was one final question, but
Yeah.
from Arlene, but if you can't, I understand.
No, that's fine. How can I not take a question
I
from
think
Riley?
this is a really good way to end. Arlene, I'm going to ask you a question. Is that good, or do you want to ask it?
No, that's fine.
You go
That's
ahead. You're talking already.
what, this was a holiday of miracles, the miracle of our Exodus. And during the course of the war, the last year and a half, we continually hear of miracles that have happened. And you mentioned a couple during your talk. Can you believe? Can you believe? Is there anywhere where there's a consolidation of all these individual miracles that have happened to an assorted group of people, soldiers, hostages, families, that we could use at the Seder? Because I love the Dayan and Avodim Hayim and all this. It would have been enough if God had done. I'd like something more current because I think it'll connect more with our lives today. And I just didn't know if there had been any consolidation done.
It's such a good question. It's a perfect question to end with. So really, thank you for asking that. I love it. I would say one thing. There's a man named Dov Lipman. Maybe some of you know him. He's an American who made Aliyah many years ago. He had 18 months in the Knesset as a member of Knesset many years ago under a short-lived government. He, since October 7th, more or less, the past year and a half, he's been using his Facebook page as just sharing all these unbelievable stories. I wouldn't say all the stories fit into the category of miracle. They're all inspiring. Some of them will literally bring you to tears. They're just all kinds of unbelievable, powerful, emotional, inspiring stories from this, time period that we're living through. So I'm putting his name in the chat, Dov Lipman, D-O-V, Lipman. He actually published a book already of some of these stories. I forget what it's called, but you can easily find it. Just Google him and you'll find it. And like literally pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I wrote him. I know him personally. I wrote him like your stories have literally like just brought so much power and strength and positivity and inspiration and what's the word? Lifting upness, if that's such a word, into my life this past year and a half. And I thanked him for it. I would highly recommend go to his Facebook page. I'm sure you can find
I
many
just
stories that
linked it.
I'd love to bring into the Seder. Yeah, great. There's a link in the comments right now.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Akiva, once again for
Sure.
everything.
Thank you, everybody. Chag Sameach. Have a beautiful,
Laila.
inspiring, uplifting Passover. All the
Thank
best,
you.
You
everybody.
too, Laila Tov.
Okay, bye-bye.
Chag
Shalom.
Sameach.
Chag
Thanks,
Thank
Sameach.
Sameach.
you.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Before we break into schmooze, I just wanted to say, in terms of learning Hebrew, it's so much harder when you're older. I think whoever was asking left. But if you can send your grandkids, and I know my parents are still in debt from sending me, if you can send them to Jewish day school, do it. Because half my day was English and half was Hebrew since I was 5. And that helped me learn. Because it's easier when you're little. All right, so we're going into schmooze mode, Steve's words. You're welcome to stay and talk, or this is the end of the program.
If you want like a class or to learn online, but if they charge, the American Jewish University from California has basic Hebrew classes. Also, Gratz College has basic Hebrew classes.
Yeah.
You just have to pay for them, and if you want to learn, then unfortunately you have to pay
Yeah,
because the free courses tend not to be very good.
yeah. I think my dad did some courses through Jerusalem Post and they weren't good, and then they wouldn't stop charging him for them, even after he stopped doing them. So I don't know. Duolingo's
But
okay, but I find her.
AJU and Gratz have really good basic Hebrew classes.
Right, AJU has.
And it's all conversational, it's all on Zoom, and you're interacting with other people who are learning Hebrew just along with you.
Right. Oh, thank